At this point, I'm going to introduce our speaker for the day. Our speaker today is District Polio Chair Tim Mulcrone. Having been inspired as a GSE team member to Chile in 1985, Tim became one of the original charter members of Chanhassen Rotary, chartered in 1987. He is a past president, multiple Paul Harris Award recipient, has served on the district's Group Study Exchange Committee, Club Visioning Team, and Assistant District Governor of Area 6. He has also played an active role in Chanhassen Rotary's relief efforts in Chimbote, Peru. Tim has taken an interest in moving Rotary closer to completing our effort to eliminate polio worldwide and was recently asked to lead the district's polio fundraising effort. I enlisted Tim to help promote our club's interest in the Rotary Foundation and in particular Polio Plus. Please welcome Tim Mulcrone.
1985 was a long time ago for me, and I've met so many great Rotarians around the district and around the world, actually. And as I look around this room, I know somebody just about at every single table. I got a nice note from Jim Lucas, and he said, "I'm sorry I can't be here today. I have to go to San Diego with my wife." How sorry really could Jim Lucas be? You'll have to tell him that I said that. He couldn't say, you know, I have a family emergency or I have to go to a funeral. He had to say, I'm really sorry I can't be there, but I have to go to San Diego. My goal today is to inform you of our progress in polio eradication, inspire you, and hopefully entertain you. Something a little bit better than just receiving a brochure on a table or in your mail. And we all like to have a good speaker, and I want our journey together to be a fun one. Let's start off with a little video, 1-minute video.
We are this close.
We are this close.
Toeterek models.
This close to making history.
Ofon Wantinti.
We are this close.
We are this
We're
close.
this close.
This close to changing the world. We are this close to making sure no child suffers a crippling disease ever again.
We are this close to making history.
We are this close to ending polio.
Because we are this close to ending polio.
We are this close to ending polio.
We are this
close
close.
to changing the world.
This close
All we need is you.
Is you.
It's you.
is you.
We are this close. This close.
Be a part of history at rotary.org/endpolio.
Let's take a look at this Time magazine. This is from last January. It says, the rear guard of the polio virus is being outgunned on nearly every front by Rotary International. Who else is in here? President Obama and other heads of state. Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf. Gandolfini, the cinema celebrity, just passed away recently. Other cinema celebrities, and of course sports heroes, chock full of sports heroes. And I showed this to a Rotarian friend of mine, and he says, well, we just got to get this news out there. I said, dude, you're in Time magazine. How much better does it get than that? And he says, wow. That's amazing. And you know what? I see it not only in things like Newsweek, but I see it in Wall Street Journal. I ran just a Google search for the last 24 hours. Rotary was in the news with regard to polio, even within this last 24 hours. In The Economist, all today's mainstream media, if you happen to be looking for it. Bill Gates does speak about our efforts to eliminate polio in the world, and he's put over $350 million towards it. And he inspired Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, to give $100 million of his own money. So a brief history, since you never know who's all in the audience that's new to the game, right? 1955, a fellow by the name of Salk develops a cheap and effective vaccine to eliminate polio. And it is huge news because it had been the scourge for millennium, right? 30 years later, 1985, despite that cheap and effective vaccine, there were 387,000 annual cases in 125 countries. And Rotary said, that's unacceptable. And we vowed to eradicate polio in the world, and we nearly have. So, 2012, 223 cases in all of 2012. The number for 2013, 369. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. We're down to 3 remaining countries, and only parts of 3 remaining countries that are on the endemic list, which is naturally occurring in any given population. The thing is with this kind of success and this kind of fame, the expectations to continue to perform become even harder, and the task becomes just a little bit greater. I'm not a great sports fan, but I'm a great study of sports fans. I love to study them. People love a winner. Don't they just love a winner? Ticket sales are up when a team is winning and continues winning. And losers are easily forgotten. They're dismissed. And you know what? They're even blamed for losing. If Adrian Peterson just would have caught that pass, really? It's all on that guy? That one pass? Isn't it really all about the team? But that's how the public sees it. To be at the top of your game, you need to be able to address any issue which may inhibit reaching our ultimate goal of eradication of polio in the entire world. So, can you answer the tough questions? Why are we concerned with polio in the Middle East? Because it's just a plane ride away. You know, I talked about the bump up from 223 to 369. Just a plane ride away from those places. We had it limited down to 3 endemic countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. But it border jumped, and we got some issues in the Cape Horn of Africa and in Syria. Only served to illustrate the need to get it done. 22 children in Syria, under 2 affected because immunizations had been interrupted for the last 3 years in that war-torn country. Simply served to illustrate the danger of losing our focus. How about this one? Can you answer this one? Don't vaccinations actually cause polio? Interesting. Tough question if you're not ready for it. It is possible. At the rate of 600 per 2.5 billion. That's almost negligible. And only in areas where immunizations are poorly done. And only in areas where they're using oral polio vaccine. Not possible when you use injectable. So the answer isn't not to do immunizations. The answer is to do thorough immunizations, or learn as you go, and to go from trivalent vaccines to bivalent vaccines to single dose vaccines to injectable vaccines, which is it's the end game strategy. I'm happy to report is multifaceted and constantly changing and really well adept. How about this one? Aren't immunizations linked to autism? No. What was a concern about a particular preservative in a vaccine not even related to polio vaccine has morphed into a huge anti-immunization campaign. You know, I'd give to polio, but contributions don't go towards Paul Harris Fellowship, right? They do. They do. The last bastion of polio virus is located in some very dismal, dark, dank crevices in the world, in impoverished places in the world. And to get to it requires, in sports language, the commitment of an Olympian. To get to it, we're up against some really very tough adversaries. Fatigue. It's a long fight, 30 years. Vying against other noble and competing interests. Rotary does a lot of good, but this is our #1 effort. Vying against apathy on the part of those who don't recognize, and those memories of the scourge of polio are being lost. And also new and previously unimaginable foes, such as myth, anti-immunization movements, and even the Taliban. The struggle to end polio reminds me of my climb up Kilimanjaro a year and a half ago. After 3 days of climbing, I was doing pretty good. At Kibo Hut, 15,500 feet. We slept very briefly, and then at midnight we made a launch up to Gilman's Point. That was a 6.5-hour journey to get to there, and it was a pretty steep angle. And a few hours into it, I had to figure out, what in the world am I going to do? I'm up against some serious fatigue. Now, they are carrying some people down past me, bug-eyed, possibly cerebral edema, maybe pulmonary edema. My only issue is fatigue, but I am really, really exhausted. So cold, my water bag, even despite the efforts to try and keep the water tube open, had frozen. And I started counting my steps. 1, 2. I'm stepping in a thing called scree. So every step is about a half step as I go. And when I got to 50, I thought I was going to pass out or lose control over my bodily functions. Then I stopped, and I started counting my breaths. That was 1. Taking in as much oxygen as I could, squeezing out every bit of carbon dioxide I could. When I got to 25, I felt I could take my next step. And I started counting again. Those became my benchmarks. 50 steps, 25 breaths. After 6.5 hours, I got to Gilman's Point, and then another 2.5 hours later, I got to Uhuru Peak at 19,340 feet. Polio eradication is our calling, and it is our commitment. And our commitment is not yet fulfilled. And for people of integrity, like Rotarians, that means everything. So what will be our personal benchmarks as we fight the next 5 years and meet a budget of over $5 billion? Did he say billion? Yeah, with a B. The fact of the matter is we're over $4.5 billion funded towards that 5. Commitments have been made. So yes, the fight, since it began until its end, is expected to be over $9 billion, and Rotary alone has been over $1 billion invested. But we can do it. So our goal of eradicating polio in the world is as close as Uhuru Peak was to me. When they pointed it out to me and said, there it is, and it was about 100 yards away, I never changed my pace. I just kept that same pace, and I got there. The last case of polio could be identified in 2014. That's the current estimate. The last case of polio in the world. Let me tell you a little story to illustrate a point. A mouse looked through a crack in the farmhouse wall, and he sees a trap. So he retreats back to the barnyard and reports, there's a mouse trap in the house. There's a mouse trap in the house. And the chicken with his head in a hunting peck for grain says, that's really very interesting, Mr. Mouse, but, I'm really quite busy. And Pig sympathized and said, I'm sorry for you, Mr. Mouse, and be sure that you are in my prayers. And the cow says, that's quite interesting, Mr. Mouse, but of course that doesn't really affect me. So the mouse left, head down, dejected, to face the mousetrap alone. That very night, the sound of a mousetrap catching its prey could be heard in the darkness. The farmer's wife goes to investigate, but she does not see that in the darkness the tail of a poisonous snake has been caught in the trap, and she gets bit. So the farmer takes her to the hospital, but he returns back home with her, and she has a fever. Everybody knows, treat a fever with some chicken noodle soup. That's right. So the farmer retreats to the barnyard to get the soup's main ingredient, the chicken. You know what? She did not get well, and so many people came to sit with the farmer's wife that he had to slaughter the cow in order to feed the people that came to sit with her. And when she did die for the funeral, he had to butcher the pig. So the next time somebody tells you about something that is threatening one of the people in the world, like polio, we're all at risk, just like that barnyard. Such is the case with polio. It's estimated if we do not finish this fight, there will be 10 million new cases of polio in the next 40 years. That's if we try to control it. If we simply try to control it, we have to eliminate it. And if you don't think so, please consider this. 1 in 20 of our own children are not being properly immunized. That's according to the Centers for Disease Control. We've had cases of measles and pertussis outbreaks in the U.S. Those are some of the first immunizations that kids get these days, standard immunizations. And they should serve to illustrate the danger. I'm going to take you back another story. 1946. In the spring of that year, a 13-year-old boy and his 11-year-old sister were walking the 1.5 miles back home from school to their Foley, Minnesota farm. It was a beautiful day, beautiful spring day. They were close in age, and they did all their chores together. And she looked up to her brother, who had been her best friend all of her life. He began talking excitedly about the tractor that was on order, a 1946 Farmall. Man, you know, in that day, all U.S. resources had been going towards the war effort. Steel was in big demand during those war years. You know, they were cutting down the M1 rifles, not the rifle itself, but the bayonet on the end of the rifle. They were cutting it down from 16 inches down to 10 inches to save 6 inches of steel for some other application. But now, a year after the war had ended, things like tractors made out of steel might be available again. And he was very excited. He couldn't stop talking about it. But you know what? That 11-year-old girl, she got a strange and foreboding feeling came over her. At her age, she didn't recognize she had a little bit of premonition, and she just could not stomach him talking about that tractor. Shut up! I don't want to hear about that tractor anymore. She started to cry. And he looked at her oddly and ran off to the farm. At the farm, John and Ida Carlin were busy with crops in the house and crops in the field. As was common in the days before penicillin, Marcel had died at age 2 of scarlet fever. Johnny had died at the age of 14 of rheumatic fever after having been in bed for an entire year. Of the 11 living children, 3 were off to war as part of the mandatory service in those days. 6 were still at home. Summer came, and with it, a polio epidemic. Summer 1946. And except for church, people were avoiding getting together at all. No birthday parties, no going to the theater, no going to the pool. It was a very, very frightening time. Then one Wednesday in August, the 13-year-old boy started feeling a little lousy. Everyone in the family had come through sort of a summer crud, so John and Ida weren't all that concerned at that particular day. On Thursday, the boy was worse, but the tractor was supposed to be delivered that day. The boy said he was feeling fine. It wasn't true, but there's no way he's going to leave that farm. The tractor did come, and the boy dragged himself out to it and sat on it, draping himself over the steering wheel. His sister climbed up and stood next to him. He was too weak to start it, and he turned to her and he says, "I'll teach you how to drive it tomorrow." The next day, Friday, the boy was very ill. John and Ida took him to Doc Donaldson in Foley. He diagnosed it as polio. He said there's nothing that he could do, nothing that St. Cloud Hospital could do, but maybe down at the University of Minnesota, and so that's where they went by ambulance. His little sister was so scared. She climbed up in a crude fort that she and her brother had built. It was in the oak tree across the driveway from the farmhouse, and by August it's full of foliage. She started to pray. She had never prayed that intense before, despite the fact that they prayed all the time. They prayed before meals, they prayed during storms, they prayed for her brothers in the war, they prayed for world peace. But she had never prayed that constantly and that intensely before. John and Ida came home with the ambulance, but without her brother that day, to attend to chores. And the next morning the news arrived that her brother had died. The girl was just devastated. Her brother's wake was in the living room of the farmhouse. Nobody came in. They drove in, and they just drove around a circle. And they waved, tears of condolences, and very few would get out. The young girl, her name is Ann. She's my mom. The 13-year-old boy, Tim, he is my uncle. I am my mom's firstborn of 6. She named me in memory of him. I asked her to tell me the details of Tim's story, and she did, and it made her cry. You know what? That's over 60 years ago. She's the most emotionally strong and resilient person that I know, and her pain is as raw now as it was 60 years ago. So here's a strange twist of fate. I didn't join Rotary for its polio eradication efforts. So what a strange thing that I find myself before you and many others talking about Rotary's fight against polio and other preventable diseases that could bring so much, here's the key, unnecessary pain and suffering to the world. Polio is a very painful disease. 1 in 200 will be affected. 5 to 15% of those affected will die. We're so close to securing one of the greatest victories over this disease. The first was smallpox. We have legions of willing workers, and we're not alone in this fight, although we lead the team. What a team it is. UNICEF, Centers for Disease Control, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, World Health Organization. This is just one area of Rotary in which you and Rotary's foundation might make a lasting difference in the world. Remember the story about the starfish where the gal is walking along and the tide has receded, and now there is thousands of starfish that are laying on the beach that are going to die in the day's sun. And she starts throwing them back, and somebody comes along and says, "Why are you bothering? There are thousands of starfish." And she says, "Well, you know what? It made a difference to that one, and it made a difference to that one, and it made a difference to that one." I participated in National Immunization Day in India. My wife was there, and that was the feeling that she got when she had that first baby put in her arms, and she gave those 2 life-saving drops of polio vaccine. And she was moved to tears knowing that she had made a difference to that one. If you're interested in such a trip, I can connect you with those kinds of trips. The week that I went, the Delhi newspaper carried the headline that India was being removed from the endemic list. Do you think that was an exciting day in my life? The Rotary Foundation is at the heart of all we do, including polio eradication. And the Rotary Foundation is and has been a remarkable steward of the money that we send to it. So please consider giving. Your contributions there are recorded by Rotary as foundation giving, do qualify for Paul Harris Award and recognition. And I've put some brochures out there for you. But more importantly, recognize that we don't have to do this alone. We talk about Facebook. You bring up my Facebook page, my This Close ad is my Facebook page, and anyone can do that. So put it on your Facebook. Host a polio eradication fundraiser geared at getting the non-Rotarian public involved or at least aware. We did 2 events last year. I hope you're aware of them. We connected with the Twins for one, and we connected with the Minnesota Lynx. Big year for the Lynx. 11,000 people I was able to put this brochure in their hands on that night that we connected with them. Once eliminated, we could have $1 billion a year to dedicate to any number of other issues in the world. Today I've resigned myself to be forever in debt to Rotary for connecting me to the palpable knowledge that I can make a difference in this world. It's been said that Rotary could be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize if we were successful in this endeavor. And if that were to occur, could you fully share in the excitement? I think about it like, wow, if that were to occur, I want to really fully be able to share in that excitement and say I was a part of that effort. In our busy and blessed lives, we can get going pretty well. Down the straight and narrow, just concentrating on just what's ahead. I think about the commuter, down something like American Boulevard. I'm reminded of the commuter that goes down and all of a sudden, bam, something hits the side of his car. I think it was a brick. Screeches on the brakes, jumps out of the car, going to take on whoever has thrown that brick. Winds his way through between the cars. He finds a boy crying over another boy who was tipped over in a wheelchair. He says, "I'm so sorry, mister. I'm so sorry. But I couldn't get anyone to stop and help." My fellow Rotarians, this is my brick. This is our legacy in the making. And when our tarnished Rotary pins are found by our great-grandchildren, what will they be told that symbol represents? I want it to be synonymous with an end to the scourge of polio that had crippled and killed millions of people. And our children's children will say, wow, or whatever it is they say that day. I want to thank you for allowing me to share this time in the last 26 years of Rotary with you. And I wish you well in your personal foundation giving decision. Godspeed our goal of a polio-free world. Thank you. Sure I do. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
What is being done in these countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan where aid workers that are trying to give the vaccines are being shot at in harm's way, just like they're fighting a war. I know we're fighting a war against polio, but I mean, we're not using bullets and they are.
Those incidents are unfortunate. We've had, upwards of 20 plus healthcare workers that have been killed trying to deliver any number of vaccines, including polio. They've been local people. We haven't had Rotarians killed that I'm aware of. What is being done? Every government in the world is on board with this, and so security does travel. There are security lapses, but the effort does continue. I pulled the last 24 hours of news coverage, and for instance, in Peshawar, Pakistan, they're inaugurating 3 days of anti-polio drive there in the FATA area, and they talk about that there are no issues of refusals in FATA as people were demanding for vaccination to protect their children from lifelong disability. Government, in consultation with technical partners, has chalked out a robust strategy for rooting out polio from the region in 2014 and get to the desired objective. Similarly, in Pakistan, a fellow observed, this is off the news, and I think it was the health secretary there in a press conference, observed that the reporting of 3 polio cases from a district was a big question mark on the performance of the officers and the officials concerned with that district. I mean, so they're, the heat's on, utilizing a lot of local people, and the Global Polio Eradication Initiative is so multifaceted that whatever the obstacle is, it is not one size fits all. It's very fluid. So if it's, for instance, a religious objection, then the initiative calls for a response that will get people within that religious community to speak up and support the effort, for an example. So plenty is being done. Anything?
I'm Ricky, so I can ask you a silly question maybe, but what does eradication look like? I mean, does it mean that immunization has to go on forever, or does immunization occur for 3 years after the last case, and then they can stop doing immunization? What does eradication look like?
What does eradication look like? Thank you very much. We're expecting the last case, even recently we're expecting the last case of polio to be identified by the end of 2014. That's this year, right? And so what happens after that? The immunizations must continue for like 3 to 5 years beyond that in order to ensure full eradication. They test the sewage systems for the virus. That's how they establish whether the virus is actually gone from an area or not. I hope that's helpful for you.
So it's geographic immunization goes on for 3 years, not region-wide.
Yeah, it's region-wide and sometimes nationwide in some cases, until eradication is fully established.
These anti-immunization movements, forgive me, but that just seems like such a bad idea. Why do these things pop up?
It's very interesting. I'm so glad I could have put you up for this question. What about the anti-immunization folks? I've got a great story for you. When I was president of my club, and it was Foundation Giving Month, and I was all about the polio fundraising, a fairly new member questioned whether we should be raising any money for immunizations. Not just to me, in an email blast to the entire club. And I'm like, oh my gosh, on my watch? Do you think I was furious? So I had to learn everything I could about polio, everything, all the time. I fought a very public intellectual battle with this member, and in the end, do you think I convinced her? I did not. And in fact, that member left. So that was a double whammy on both accounts. So, before I took on this job, I started talking to some of my people, my peeps. Mr. Potts, Chief Potts, Bud Olson? I'm on the golf course with former Sheriff of Carver County, Bud Olson. And he says, I'm telling him the story, I'm getting all wound up. He says, Tim, he's a much better manager of people than I am. And he said, you gotta take a deep breath. You gotta figure out a way to bring them along for the greater good of Rotary. I'm like, whatever, pal. And I just, whacked one into the bushes, on that golf course. And I'm like, but I so respect the man that for 3 weeks, and sometimes it takes that long to think about a win-win. I thought, and for 3 weeks, and I finally came up with this. Here's your ammunition, folks. I went through 3 weeks of thinking about this so you won't have to. When you encounter the anti-immunization folks, when you encounter them, simply say, you know, I know we're not going to agree on this point. Rotary is definitely going to go forward. But you know, you can contribute to the Rotary Foundation, and you can earmark your funds for health and water. You're going to sanitation and water. Earmark your funds for that. Your funds will not be going towards polio immunization. And because polio virus is spread by unclean water, you and I will be together on that fight. Okay? I'll leave you with that one. You want to take one more? One more question.
So we don't think polio comes here. My best friend in 1946 spent 6 months at Sister Kenny. So if we don't eradicate polio worldwide, it will be back here, and then our children will suffer. And he was partially paralyzed. So it's a great effort.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Thank you, folks.